Will this review end up being fast-paced? I don't know, but if you genuinely clicked on a review of this movie, not expecting spoilers, I don't know what to tell you beyond, there's gonna be spoilers. I highly recommend the movie if you're a Spider-Man fan, and especially a fan of all films that have come up so far, and I still recommend it on its own just as a movie, but that's all I can say without getting into spoilers. So, spoiler time. Spider-Man No Way Home is a 0 out of 10 movie because when Peter goes to MJ at the end, he just orders coffee. Not any particular size, not takeaway cup or drink-in cup, no particular type of coffee. Are the United States genuinely so backwards ass you can just walk in and order vague coffee and there's only one type that exists? What a shit movie. Could you imagine walking into a Hungry Jack's, and most of you don't know what that is, could you imagine just walking into a McDonald's and saying, I want burger, and just getting a burger? No, that's certified insane. Anyway, the movie then. Overall, Spider-Man No Way Home is a solid film. While it has a fairly slow start, I think that generally plays into its favour. A big part of this movie revolves around the fact that Peter's identity is known now, and the whole movie hinges on the fact that he wants to change that. So it's important to actually show how it's affected instead of just being told of how it's affecting him. Instead of just having him explain his identity being revealed has affected him greatly, we actually get to see what those effects are, the struggles he has to deal with because of the previous film's events, so on and so forth. It's necessary, and once things get started, they don't really stop. Peter feels a lot more like a character in this film in general, and I think it really does alleviate any concerns people might have had about Peter just turning into another Iron Man. Not only does he go through a lot of struggles other Spider-Men do, namely the loss of a loved one, great power, great responsibility, self-blame on himself, and the end of the film basically undoes any chance there was of Peter just becoming an Iron Man, leaving him in a situation that's a lot more familiar for Spider-Man fans. There's meant to be a but somewhere in that sentence, but I forgot to include it. And while I could say I don't like the film backpedaling on what made this Peter unique, I think what it gave him in place of that still keeps him relatively unique. Knowledge of what will happen if his identity is known, not having an aunt or an uncle, and experience with multiple other Spider-Men, I think he still has a unique identity. And I guess let's talk about the characters, because if we're being honest, that's what people are coming to the movies to see. All the Spider-Men and their villains coming together again. No one's going into this being like, I want to see a complex deconstruction of the narrative meaning of French fries. Aside from Venom, Vulture, Mysterio, Harry, and Rhino, basically all the villains of the previous 3 Spider-Man movies appear. And most of the ones that don't appear get referenced, so that's fine. Darkhawk was the first villain we got to see return, and for the most part, I think they did him justice. My biggest concern from the start was them turning him into an actively evil and antagonistic character, and they didn't do that. While he is very run-of-the-mill villain for a lot of the movie, that does play into how he was for most of Spider-Man 2 when he was under the influence of the fucking arms. Admittedly, his redemption doesn't have the same emotional weight in this film as it did in Spider-Man 2, considering Tom Holland, who barely knows the guy, just magics up a new chip and puts it on him and now he's good. At least it does happen, and he remains a good guy and does not go back to evil. Darkhawk was good. Green Goblin was the second villain, and as obvious as it was that Goblin would take over Norman at the wrong moment and make him into a big villain, I still like how he ended up. As Norman, he felt genuinely sympathetic and likable, and he had good chemistry with Tom. As Goblin, he was entertainingly evil and had 2 really good fight scenes. He was good. Electro was third, and brings on the fact that I love how they didn't just shit on the Amazing Spider-Man films just because nobody likes them. Electro was redone to be more of an actual character. Jamie Foxx gets to show off his really good acting talent in a way the CGI of his initial movie just couldn't. His motivations are a lot more understandable, and they really play with the crossover acts with the film by answering the question of what had happened if this guy who draws power from energy sources got his hands on an arc reactor. He was pretty good. Even if he didn't have any sort of arc, I think reinventing the character to make him actually good is all I needed to do. Sandman was fourth, and I was a little mixed, but in the end I liked it. He helps Tom out at the start, and isn't necessarily a malicious figure for the rest of the film. In fact, Sandman going to extremes to achieve his goal of seeing his daughter is completely in keeping with his character for Spider-Man 3. He never does anything actively malicious like Electro or Goblin do, he just wants to go home. So I think he was done fairly well. Then there's Lizard. Lizard's fine. I don't know, I feel like he just had the least going on in the film. He remains a decent enough villain, but he got left out of the focus a lot. What I really love was all the scenes where these characters just got to interact. Having Ock, Norman, Electro, Lizard, and Sandman together just talking got so much character out of them, and that really worked for me. Each villain brought something to the table, except which is what's important, and the Spider-Men, which is simultaneously the biggest spoiler and also the most obvious thing of all time, getting together was great. Instead of just relying on nothing but nostalgia for these characters, Andrew and Toby both got what I consider to be pretty good establishing character scenes for themselves. Andrew's interactions with MJ and Ned and how he goes about acting in the film channel the best parts of Amazing Spider-Man, the sense of general chill in his version of the character. He's fairly relaxed, and he's prone to quick back and forth banter that's often full of sarcastic quips and such. Toby's meanwhile establishes that he's been looking to help since the start. He has that vibe of innocent kindness that his incarnation lives on. And having these establishing scenes for both really matters when you do a crossover film that inherently risks alienating some people who aren't familiar with either version. But also, these scenes were the only ones in any movie I've seen where people got up and clapped in the cinema, so that was great. And obviously, while the novelty of seeing these characters get together is amazing, seeing them all interacting was just so fun and had some genuinely heartfelt moments. The Spider-Man having that quiet moment just talking about who they've lost is just as good as a scene of them just talking about the villains they fought and their spider journeys. I especially like that when Andrew, the least popular of the three, says he's lame, the other two make sure to encourage him that he's not. Like I said, the film doesn't want to just shit on Amazing Spider-Man, and that is great. And while it does sort of come off initially like Holland just talked to the Spider-Man and then was immediately fixed from the events that just transpired, he wasn't. His final fight with Norman really works to make it clear that talking didn't fix him, it just gave him something to distract him, and when he confronted with Norman again, yeah, he's pretty out for blood. It was that experience at the very end that's what helped him to move on more than just talking to him. Tobey's Spider-Man stopping him from killing Norman, and that moment of just silence where everything that could have been said was communicated using nothing but the expressive talent of the actors is fantastic. So all the characters are good, all their interactions are good, and their scenes are good. I didn't bring up MJ and Ned because they're about the same as always. What about the story though? It's fine what it's intended to be. But the only thing I thought was overtly contrived was Doctor Strange getting ratioed for that long by Peter, and that Ned's magical abilities basically come out of nowhere beyond a minor offhand line earlier in the film, despite the fact that this has never been mentioned in the 3 films he's majorly appeared in outside of that one line before it happens. Infinity War and Endgame don't count, and Far From Home does count no matter how much you might not want it to. I don't have much to criticize the film on beyond that. I mean, it wasn't perfect. Namely, I think while the Doctor Strange and Spider-Man fight was visually stunning, I kept wondering why Strange had that much struggle when he can just make infinite other Doctor Stranges like he did against Thanos. Though Peter using mathematics to figure out the mirror dimension to trap Strange was cool, even if I don't for a second buy Strange being trapped for that long. If anything, I would have been okay with him just saying, oh, in that part of the mirror dimension, time flows slightly differently. Oh, also I had nowhere to naturally flow into this, but Aunt May's death was well done and emotional and really worked to give Tom Holland Peter more development than the last film gave him. And that's really all I have to say about No Way Home. The biggest draw for people is obviously the characters from various films coming together, so I felt like the most important thing to talk about was them, and for the most part they were all well done. Dr. Octopus coming back and helping the Spider-Man out in their time of need was really cool, Electro having a normal conversation with Andrew after being depowered was pretty nice, Sandman not doing anything particularly evil was relieving, and Goblin was just very entertaining. Oh right, the fight scenes, they're good. Probably should have mentioned that. Holland's first battle with Octavius is really dynamic and striking with some fun choreography, and the more advanced MCU tech being used to render Octavius helpless was a fun interaction of the universes. The first battle with Electro was great because we got to see Sandman remaining a less malicious figure and Electro starting blue, but being affected by the different electricity of the MCU world causing him to regain his body, which was a great way to not have him be a weird ultimate Electro looking motherfucker, while also having that be explained so it's not just like, oh now he looks different. The fight with Holland and Strange was visually stunning as I said, and as you'd expect from the Doctor Strange part of the MCU, even though I have a lot of trouble believing a lot of what happened in terms of Peter not getting completely ratioed. Though the Spider-Sense allowing Peter's body to continue avoiding Strange even in the astral plane was a fun interaction we normally wouldn't get. Goblin's fight with Holland was all around very solid despite Goblin not having most of his tech, Aunt May's death was tragic, Octavius getting blasted was kind of weird because it just doesn't appear for most of the film until the end. In fact, Octavius I knew he was just going to show back up in the end, but I mean, I was hyped when he did, but also kind of weird that he just vanishes for that part of the film. I also like Sandman not engaging in the fight and instead just leaving, that was nice. And of course the final battle was fanservice galore while also being genuinely great. Yeah, the scene where Andrew catches MJ was pretty fucking obviously gonna happen, but I'm glad it did. It feels like a good moment for his character seeing as he never really got anything past Amazing Spider-Man 2. I think this does a good job of wrapping up his character arc in a nice bow there. And aside from the weird bit of Ned and MJ in the middle of the final battle, I'm glad this film didn't feel the need to sprinkle a ton of quirky comedy in all the serious scenes. When the film wants to be serious, it really sells it and it works, and Holland even got to do some acting of quality I didn't think he could. Which is not to say he was bad in any of his previous films, I actually kinda like the unique take on Spider-Man that he is, and I don't think everything needs to just copy the comics. But I hadn't seen him do this yet, and it was good. I was also really worried when Happy didn't have anything to do with the emotional climax where Holland sacrificed all of his relationships to save the world, but the scene at May's grave really alleviated that. While also making sure this film has lasting consequences so it doesn't just feel like a pointless crossover fanservice movie. It is instead a pointful crossover fanservice movie. That was Spider-Man No Way Home. As I said, I highly recommend it to fans of Spider-Man, namely the films, even if you don't like Amazing Spider-Man, which chances are you probably don't, and I recommend it as a general film as well. Even though the mid-credit scene has bits of Venom left on the counter which makes no sense as they should have been transported back with him with the rest of it. Horrible movie!